It always begins in silence. A silence so ordinary, so unremarkable, that no one suspects it hides a growing storm. Families laugh behind their doors. Neighbors wave across driveways. Dogs bark at passing cars. Life moves forward in a rhythm so predictable, it lulls entire communities into a sense of safety. And that is precisely where the story of the Family Annihilator begins, within the ordinary. This isn't a tale about a stranger in the shadows, or a monster lurking in a dark alley. No. This is about the monster who lives inside the house, who shares dinner at the same table, who tucks the children into bed, and whispers "I love you" before turning out the lights. Imagine, for a moment, a quiet suburban street. Well-kept lawns. Mailboxes standing like sentinels at the edge of driveways. The scent of barbecue in the air during summer evenings. Everything feels normal, safe. And in the middle of this ordinary neighborhood, a family appears as picture-perfect as any could be. A husband. A wife. Children. Smiles in photographs. Vacations carefully posted on social media. A family that seemed to embody the dream so many aspire to. But dreams, as we know, can rot from within. Behind closed doors, reality was different. The man of the house, the father, wore two faces. To the world, he was charming, successful, perhaps even admired. But to those closest to him, there were cracks in the mask. His temper. His silence. The way his mood shifted like a storm rolling in, unannounced but impossible to ignore. The neighbors noticed nothing unusual. He waved when passing by. He mowed the lawn. He took out the trash. Routine held everything together, hiding what was breaking behind the curtains. But inside, pressure was building. Financial troubles. Strains in the marriage. A deep, gnawing dissatisfaction he never confessed to anyone. The Family Annihilator rarely snaps out of nowhere. Instead, he festers. He plans. He convinces himself that the world has conspired against him, that the very people he should protect have become part of his downfall. It is a chilling paradox. The Family Annihilator loves control more than he loves his family. When he feels that control slipping, through debt, through infidelity, through shame, his mind begins to twist. And slowly, a decision forms. One that no sane mind could justify. But to him, it begins to make sense. The street remained quiet, unaware. The neighbors didn't see the arguments whispered behind locked doors. They didn't hear the late-night pacing, the shallow breathing of a man wrestling with demons. They didn't notice how, in his mind, the house no longer felt like a home, but a stage for something far darker. And so the ordinary continued. Until, one day, the ordinary would collapse. Because the story of the Family Annihilator isn't about a sudden explosion of violence. It's about a slow erosion, a cracking of the mask. And soon, those cracks would give way, and the monster beneath would no longer be able to hide. The quiet home on the Street of Secrets was about to become something else entirely. Not a home. Not even a house. But a crime scene. And no one, not the neighbors, not the family, not even the man himself, would ever come back from it. The silence was about to end. It is one of the most chilling truths about family annihilators. They are almost always invisible until it's too late. When you picture a murderer, you might imagine someone volatile, violent, clearly dangerous. But the Family Annihilator is different. He wears a mask. A convincing one. By day, he is the husband cracking jokes at a family barbecue. The father clapping from the bleachers at his child's school play. The neighbor who lends you a shovel during winter storms. He blends in so well that even those closest to him, his wife, his children, rarely see the storm gathering behind his eyes. But masks are fragile things. And behind this man's carefully constructed facade, tension was brewing. He felt like a provider who was failing. Financial strains whispered in his ear at night. Bills piled up. Arguments over money became frequent. His wife, once his partner in everything, now felt like his judge. His children, once his pride, now felt like responsibilities he could no longer carry. It's important to understand this mindset, chilling though it may be. The Family Annihilator does not simply lose his temper. He convinces himself that he is cornered, that his options are gone, and that the only way to regain control is through destruction. But to the outside world, he seemed fine. Neighbors saw the freshly painted shutters, the well-trimmed grass, the Christmas lights glowing in December. At work, he shook hands, smiled, and talked about weekend plans. On social media, there were pictures of family vacations, posed smiles on beaches and at amusement parks. The mask of normalcy was nearly flawless. But sometimes, the cracks showed. A coworker might recall how quiet he became during lunch breaks. A neighbor might remember a strange, vacant look in his eyes while unloading groceries. His wife may have noticed how he sometimes lingered in silence, staring off as if trapped in his own head. And yet, none of it felt alarming. Not enough to warrant fear. Because how could anyone believe that the man they sat across from at dinner was secretly rehearsing the end of his own family? It is this contradiction that makes the family annihilator so terrifying. He is not the stranger breaking into your home. He is your home. His the laughter at the dinner table, the goodnight kiss, the reassuring smile in public. But masks, no matter how convincing, eventually slip. For this man, the cracks widened in small, almost imperceptible ways. He grew more distant. Conversations turned cold. His wife confided to a friend that something felt off, though she couldn't quite explain it. His children felt his absence, even when he was physically in the room. The mask was thinning, but not enough for anyone to intervene. Not yet. Because the truth was this: while the world saw a man keeping his life together, inside, he was planning. Slowly, silently, he was rehearsing scenarios in his head, imagining the unthinkable. And as the mask of normalcy began to slip, so too did his grip on reality. The stage was being set. The storm was closing in. The family annihilator was preparing for the breaking point. Perfection is fragile. It doesn't shatter all at once, it splinters, hairline fractures spreading beneath the surface until one day, everything collapses. For this family, those cracks began in ways so small they could be dismissed, even excused. A harsh word at the dinner table. A slammed door. A lingering silence after an argument. Little moments that seemed insignificant on their own, but together they painted a different picture. The husband, once attentive and charming, began to withdraw. He no longer laughed at the children's jokes. He skipped family outings. His wife noticed how easily he became irritated, how quickly his patience evaporated. But behind it all, there was a darker truth, a weight pressing down on him that he never spoke of. Financial troubles were mounting. The lifestyle they presented to the world, the vacations, the new furniture, the perfectly maintained home, was crumbling under the weight of unpaid bills and hidden debt. To neighbors, it was still the picture-perfect family. But inside the house, money became a weapon. Every argument circled back to it. Every whispered fight after the children went to bed ended in accusations, blame, and resentment. There were also whispers of infidelity. A late-night text. A phone call abruptly ended when his wife entered the room. Perhaps it was real, perhaps imagined, but the suspicion alone was enough to poison the air between them. Trust eroded. The foundation cracked. And then came the isolation. Family annihilators often begin to cut themselves off before the act. Friends noticed he stopped showing up to gatherings. Co-workers said he was distracted, his eyes clouded over as though somewhere else entirely. He stopped answering calls from extended family, stopped engaging with neighbors beyond polite nods. The facade was still there, but it was slipping. What once looked like a devoted husband and father was now something different. He grew controlling, obsessed with appearances. The family was told to smile for pictures, to act normal in public, even when behind closed doors they were unraveling. The mask had not fallen yet, but it was cracking, and beneath it, the monster was beginning to emerge. The children, innocent and unknowing, sensed something. They heard the fights. They saw the tears. Children always notice more than adults realize. They may not have understood the words, but they felt the tension in their bones, the coldness in the air. And yet, in the quiet moments, there was still hope. A family dinner where everyone laughed. A birthday celebration with cake and candles. Those brief flickers of normalcy were enough to convince the outside world, and maybe even the wife, that everything could still be saved. But the family annihilator was already slipping too far. He was no longer thinking in terms of reconciliation. He was calculating financial ruin, public humiliation, loss of control. These became obsessions in his mind, feeding the belief that his life was spiraling into a failure he could never recover from. And rather than seeking help, rather than reaching out, he turned inward, to a solution no one could have imagined. It is in this stage that the annihilator begins to rewrite the story in his head. He convinces himself that he is protecting his family by destroying it. That death is preferable to shame. That annihilation is a form of twisted mercy. The cracks were no longer just visible, they were spreading. The house was no longer a home, but a fragile facade hiding a man preparing for something irreversible. And soon, the breaking point would arrive. Every story of a family annihilator reaches a moment when the mask can no longer hold, when the cracks spread too far, when the pressure inside a man's mind finally detonates. This is the breaking point. It rarely comes from a single event. More often, it is the culmination of years, financial ruin, marital discord, loss of status, shame that festers in silence. Each layer of stress stacks upon the last until the weight becomes unbearable. For this man, the breaking point came quietly. Not with an explosion of violence in public, not with a scream, but with an internal snap that no one else could hear. Perhaps it was an argument with his wife that cut too deep. Perhaps it was the moment he realized the bills could never be paid, that the house was slipping out of their grasp, that his carefully curated life was unraveling. Or perhaps it was something more subtle, a simple glance in the mirror that revealed a man he no longer recognized. Whatever it was, he began to decide. And that is where the true horror lies. Because family annihilation is not a crime of passion. It is not an act committed in blind rage. It is calculated, planned, executed with chilling precision. He began rehearsing in his mind, imagining the night, imagining the silence that would follow. He convinced himself that this was the only way to regain control, that he was sparing his family from a future filled with shame, poverty, and disappointment. Twisted logic, but to him, it was truth. The days leading up to the act felt deceptively normal. He went to work. He exchanged pleasantries with neighbors. He kissed his children goodnight. But internally, he was no longer living in those moments, he was living in the plan. To his wife, perhaps he seemed distant, but not alarmingly so. To his children, he was simply quieter, more reserved. Nothing screamed danger. Nothing said, tomorrow, everything changes. But in his mind, the decision had been made. This breaking point is where empathy dies. Where the family stops being flesh and blood and becomes part of the annihilator's delusion. He no longer sees them as individuals with lives of their own. He sees them as extensions of himself, extensions that must be erased if he is to regain control of his narrative. And so he waits. The family annihilator rarely acts in public. He waits for the quiet of night. When the children are asleep. When the wife is vulnerable. When the house is silent and the world outside remains blissfully unaware. This was the night he chose. The night when silence would no longer be safety, but a weapon. No one knew it at the time. The neighbors were sleeping. The street was still. The house, from the outside, looked peaceful. But inside, something had shifted. The breaking point had been reached. And once that threshold is crossed, there is no going back. The night began like any other. Dinner plates were cleared, lights dimmed, children tucked into bed with whispered goodnights. To anyone passing by, the house looked serene, a picture of domestic peace. But behind those walls, the atmosphere was heavy, thick with something unspoken. The man moved quietly, almost methodically. His wife may have thought he was distracted, lost in his own head. The children, drifting into sleep, didn't notice the weight of his footsteps or the way his breathing carried a different rhythm. To them, it was just another night in the safety of their home. But for him, it was the night. The decision, rehearsed over and over in the shadows of his mind, was ready to manifest. His thoughts were steady, chillingly calm. Rage was not his fuel, it was control. Control over a life that had slipped from his grasp. Control over a family that he believed he was entitled to destroy. And so the silence began. The family annihilator's crimes are rarely loud. There are no neighbors awakened by screams, no frantic calls for help that reach the outside world. It happens swiftly, quietly, as though the house itself becomes complicit in holding the secrets. The wife is often the first. She is the one who has seen the deepest cracks, who knows the most about his unraveling. Sometimes she resists. Sometimes she begs. Sometimes she doesn't have the chance to do either. In the end, her silence becomes permanent. Then, the children. Innocent. Trusting. Their last moments defined not by fear of a stranger, but by betrayal of the very person who was supposed to protect them. Some never wake from their sleep. Others may awaken just long enough to glimpse the truth that the father they loved has become something unrecognizable. The house that once echoed with laughter now swallowed it whole. Each room fell silent, one by one, until nothing was left but stillness. It is here, in this quiet, that the enormity of the crime reveals itself. The annihilator doesn't just take lives, he erases futures. Birthdays that will never come. School graduations that will never be celebrated. A marriage that will never grow old together. All of it, gone in a single night. And when it was over, the man stood in the silence he had created. Some annihilators end their own lives, believing death will absolve them, that they can escape judgment. Others stay, attempting to construct an alibi, to weave lies around the carnage they've committed. Some even flee, as though distance could separate them from the truth. But one thing always remains, the silence. That night, no neighbor heard anything unusual. The street remained calm, the world outside continuing on in ignorance. Morning would come like it always did, the sun rising over a house that no longer held life. And when discovery eventually came, it would shatter everything. Because the night of silence was over. And the nightmare was about to be unveiled. Morning always comes. The world stirs awake, coffee brews, alarm clocks buzz, cars pull out of driveways. Life continues. But inside that quiet home, nothing moved. Neighbors began to notice small details. The curtains remained drawn longer than usual. The children didn't appear for school. The wife, who often jogged in the early morning, was absent. The family car stayed parked in the driveway. Still, no one thought the unthinkable. Not yet. It often begins with unanswered calls. Relatives trying to reach the family, growing more anxious with every ring. A boss wondering why he didn't show up for work. A teacher concerned when the children never arrived at school. These little fractures in routine pile up until someone decides to check in. And then, the discovery. Perhaps it was a neighbor knocking on the door, uneasy at the silence. Or police called to perform a welfare check after loved ones raised alarm. What they found would scar them forever. The home, from the outside, looked untouched. Peaceful. But inside it was a mausoleum. Rooms frozen in time, as if life had been snuffed out mid-breath. The smell was the first sign that something was horribly wrong. A heavy, unnatural stillness clung to the air. And then, the bodies. Investigators found what no human being should ever have to see. A wife. Children. Lives extinguished not by strangers, not by chance, but by the man meant to protect them. Some were discovered in their beds, as though sleep had carried them into death without warning. Others bore signs of struggle, silent battles fought against someone they trusted. The crime scene told a story, one more haunting than words can capture. The details, blood spatter, overturned furniture, the final positions of the bodies, painted a picture of betrayal too great to comprehend. Experienced detectives, hardened by years of violence, later admitted the sight shook them to their core. The neighbors gathered outside, drawn by flashing lights and sirens. Confusion turned to horror as whispers spread. The perfect family. The smiling couple. The children they had watched play in the yard. Gone. All of them. And the father, the annihilator, was missing. Sometimes, the perpetrator takes his own life, discovered alongside the family in a final act of control. Other times, he flees, forcing police into a desperate hunt. Whichever path he chose, the truth remained the same. The illusion of the perfect home had collapsed, revealing a nightmare beneath. The news spread quickly. Headlines screamed of the tragedy. Friends and relatives, stunned, spoke in disbelief. He loved his family. He would never do this. But he had. And that was the horror, he had. The home on the quiet street was no longer just another house. It became a place people crossed the road to avoid, a reminder that evil doesn't always lurk in shadows. Sometimes it smiles at you from across the fence. The nightmare had been uncovered. But the question still lingered: why? Why would a man destroy the very lives he had built? The answer lay not in the crime scene, but in the mind of the monster who created it. The horror of family annihilation doesn't end with the crime scene. It lingers in the question that refuses to die: why? Why would a man so ordinary, so familiar, erase the very lives he helped create? Why slaughter those who loved him most? Psychologists have studied this question for decades. What they've uncovered is chilling. Family annihilators are not a single type of killer. They are fathers, husbands, neighbors. But they share a terrifying thread, a desperate need for control. Control is the key. When the world begins to collapse around them, whether through financial ruin, infidelity, humiliation, or a fractured marriage, the annihilator does not accept failure. Instead, he convinces himself that annihilation is the only way to reclaim power. Researchers have identified patterns. Some are self-righteous, blaming their spouses for family troubles and punishing them through violence. Others are disappointed, believing their family failed to live up to expectations. There are those driven by paranoid delusions, who believe they are saving their loved ones from a fate worse than death. And then, the most chilling of all, the anomic annihilators, who see their family as an extension of themselves. When their identity collapses, they take everyone with them. The frightening truth is this: in his mind, he often believes he is acting out of love. A twisted, corrupted love, where death is reframed as mercy. He convinces himself his family cannot survive without him, that the shame or failure he faces would destroy them anyway. And so he chooses to destroy them first. This warped reasoning hides the selfishness at the core. The annihilator is not saving anyone, he is saving himself. From shame. From exposure. From failure. The murders are not acts of compassion. They are acts of ego, carried out by a man who cannot imagine a world where his family lives without him. And society struggles with this truth. Because how do we reconcile the image of a smiling father at a barbecue with the monster who later erased his children from existence? How do we understand the man who kisses his wife goodnight, then plans her death? The answer is unsettling. Sometimes, you can't. Sometimes, the darkness inside a person wears a mask so convincing that no one, not friends, not neighbors, not even family, ever sees it until it's too late. The psychology of a family annihilator is not about sudden madness. It is about a gradual corrosion of humanity. Piece by piece, the man transforms until nothing remains but obsession, control, and the belief that destruction is the only way forward. And that is why these crimes haunt us. Because they force us to confront an unbearable truth. The real danger may not be outside our homes. It may be sitting across the table. It may be smiling in family photographs. It may be the one saying "I love you" before turning out the lights. The psychology of a monster is not about what lurks in the shadows. It is about what hides in plain sight. And for the families who fall victim, there are no warnings loud enough, no signs clear enough, no second chances. Only